On the night of March 21, 2007, the town of Lafayette, Georgia, seemed quiet. Just another Wednesday evening, nothing unusual. But for Theresa Parker, it was the beginning of a new chapter. She had recently signed a lease on a small apartment, eager to start fresh after leaving her troubled marriage to police officer Samuel Parker. That night, Theresa called her close friend Rhonda. She was bubbling with excitement, telling her about decorating the new place, finally having a space of her own. The conversation ended around 9:30 p.m. with a hopeful tone. For Theresa, this wasn't just about an apartment, it was about reclaiming her life. But by morning, she was gone. Her sister Christina tried calling her phone, but it went unanswered. Hours turned into days, and Theresa's silence became deafening. Flyers were printed, vigils were held, but Theresa never came home. Statistics paint a chilling backdrop to Theresa's disappearance. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention (CDC) 2020, more than 50% of women murdered in the United States are killed by an intimate partner. The very people who promise to love and protect often become the most dangerous. Theresa's story was tragically about to join this statistic. The community would soon learn that, behind the uniform and badge of her husband Samuel Parker, a darker truth had been hiding all along. Before her name was linked to tragedy, Theresa Parker was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Born in California, she grew up surrounded by the love of her siblings. Among them, her closest bond was with Christina. The two sisters shared secrets, laughter, and dreams. Theresa had a warmth that drew people in. Friends described her as empathetic, quick to listen, and always ready with encouragement. She was the type of person who remembered birthdays, who left sticky notes of kindness on coworkers' desks, who believed in people even when they didn't believe in themselves. Professionally, Theresa found her place in public service. She began working as a police dispatcher and later rose to the role of supervisor in Georgia. The irony is hard to ignore. Her job was to answer calls for help, often from women in distress. She understood the voices of fear on the other end of the line, never knowing one day she would become one of them. Her sister Christina remembered her laughter most of all. She could walk into a room and light it up, even if she was struggling. She made sure others felt joy. Theresa was more than a victim. She was a life full of promise, love, and resilience until darkness crept into her home. Samuel Parker was everything Theresa thought she wanted: a strong, confident man, respected in Walker County. As a police officer, he wore the uniform with pride. Neighbors knew him as the man who would step into danger to protect them. But Samuel had two faces. The badge he wore in public shined, but at home, his darkness ruled. His first marriage to Kayla was a warning few heard. Kayla later testified that Samuel's abuse was relentless. He once dragged her through broken glass, leaving scars both visible and hidden. On another occasion, he allegedly put a revolver to her head, and yet, he kept his badge. National statistics show how common this pattern is. According to the National Institute of Justice, 2019, 1 in 4 women in the U.S. experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. In law enforcement families, the rates can be even higher, with studies suggesting domestic abuse occurs at 2 to 4 times the national average. But silence and protection within the blue wall often shield officers from accountability. To the world, Samuel Parker was the trusted cop. But to the women who loved him, he was a man capable of terror. When Theresa met Samuel, he was charming, charismatic, and persuasive. Their romance moved quickly. Theresa, a woman full of empathy, believed she had found someone who would stand by her. But passion soon turned volatile. By 2002, the cracks were clear. Theresa reported a domestic violence incident, but the case went nowhere. In 2003, during a Florida trip, Samuel threatened her with a gun, later waving threats of suicide as a way to control her. Then came the chilling words Theresa never forgot. "I could hide a body so well, no one would ever find it." It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise hanging over her life. By 2006, Theresa had enough. She filed for divorce. Two colleagues at the police department, she quietly admitted Samuel's drinking had worsened, his temper unpredictable, his threats unbearable. Christina stood firmly by her side, encouraging her to embrace freedom. Theresa began making plans for her new apartment, choosing furniture, dreaming of peace. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope, but this hope placed her in even greater danger. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence 2017 reports that the most dangerous time for a victim of abuse is when she tries to leave. Nearly 75% of domestic violence-related homicides occur after separation. Theresa was determined to reclaim her life, but Samuel was determined to keep control. The timeline of that night is chilling. Theresa ended her call with Rhonda around 9:30 p.m., planning to avoid Samuel until the divorce finalized. But by late evening, something shifted. Samuel phoned a fellow officer, Ben Chafin, in the middle of the night. His words were haunting. He had done something terrible, but Ben kept the secret. Meanwhile, Theresa's SUV was seen, then later, suspiciously, returned to her driveway. It appeared staged, as if someone wanted to create confusion about her movements. When family couldn't reach her, Christina's panic grew. She knew her sister's habits, her reliability. Theresa wouldn't vanish without a word. Within days, vigils sprang up. Flyers covered storefronts. The community gathered in prayer. But Samuel remained cold, emotionless. Every missing person case brings uncertainty. But this one carried an extra layer. The prime suspect was one of their own. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, took over, knowing local officers couldn't impartially handle Samuel Parker. Searches of his home revealed firearms, freshly cleaned vehicles, and suspicious evidence. Tracking dogs followed Samuel's scent down trails near the Chattooga River. His hostility toward investigators only raised suspicion. But the most troubling detail was Ben's silence. He had heard Samuel's late-night confession, but stayed quiet, torn between loyalty and justice. This was a classic example of police culture shielding its own, a phenomenon documented in multiple studies of law enforcement. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Samuel's story didn't add up. In 2008, Samuel Parker was arrested for Theresa's murder. But there was one glaring issue: no body. Could prosecutors convince a jury without physical remains? The 2009 trial gripped the state. Witnesses came forward. Samuel's first wife, Kayla, fellow officers, Theresa's friends. They painted a portrait of a man who lived with rage, threats, and violence. Finally, Ben broke his silence. He admitted that Samuel called him the night Theresa vanished, confessing to doing something irreversible. The prosecution leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence: the threats, the history of abuse, the missing wife, the staged SUV. The defense argued, no body, no murder. But the jury saw through the facade. Samuel Parker was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. It was a victory for justice, but it still left one painful void. Where was Theresa? For 3 long years, Theresa Parker's family lived in limbo. They held vigils, lit candles, and prayed for answers. But no matter how hard they searched, no matter how many flyers they handed out or miles they walked, Theresa remained missing. There was no grave to visit, no certainty to hold, until only silence. That silence was shattered in March of 2010. When a farmer walking near the Chattooga River stumbled upon something small but unmistakably human, a jawbone. At first, the discovery was almost too shocking to process. Investigators were called immediately, and forensic experts were brought in to examine the remains. Days later, the results came back. Through dental records, The Georgia Bureau of Investigation confirmed what the Parker family had feared for years. The remains belonged to Theresa Parker. The river, with its strong currents and thick woods along the banks, had hidden her secret all this time. But nature has a way of revealing what people try to bury. Forensic anthropologists believe Samuel likely chose the spot carefully, counting on the water and wilderness to conceal his crime. But like so many killers before him, he underestimated time for Theresa's family. The news brought a complicated mix of emotions. Her sister Christina described it as the hardest relief I've ever felt. Relief, because they finally knew. Sorrow, because it confirmed the truth they dreaded. Closure, but of the most painful kind. In a press conference, the sheriff addressed the community. This is a difficult day, but one that brings closure to a family and to all of us who searched for Theresa. Behind his words, the entire town of Lafayette seemed to exhale. The discovery of Theresa's remains also carried legal weight. Prosecutors had tried Samuel Parker without a body, relying on circumstantial evidence, testimony, and his own incriminating words. Now, even though the conviction had already been secured, the jawbone served as final, undeniable proof that Theresa was gone and that Samuel's threats about hiding a body were more than just words. The media swarmed the story, framing it as both a tragedy and a cautionary tale. News anchors emphasized the dangers women face in abusive relationships, reminding viewers of the grim reality. According to the National Institute of Justice, women attempting to leave abusive partners are at the highest risk of homicide in those moments of transition. Theresa's murder was not an isolated story, was part of a much larger epidemic. Christina and her family chose to see this not only as the end of their search, but as the beginning of a mission. At vigils and community gatherings, Christina spoke openly about the signs of abuse Theresa had endured, urging women not to ignore red flags and urging communities not to turn a blind eye when police officers, those sworn to protect, become the abusers. Finding Theresa's remains did not erase the pain, but it gave her family a place to grieve, a gravesite where flowers could be laid and prayers could be whispered. After 3 years of uncertainty, the Parker family finally had the chance to say goodbye, and for the people of Lafayette, Theresa's story would forever stand as a reminder. Silence protects the abuser, but truth, even when it comes years late, always rises to the surface. From his prison cell, Samuel Parker continues to claim innocence. He has granted occasional interviews, portraying himself as the target of a conspiracy fueled by colleagues, prosecutors, and even his own family. He insists the system turned against him because he wore a badge, but the evidence, the testimony, and the verdict tell another story, one of violence, control, and a woman silenced by the man who vowed to love her. In 2014, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld his conviction, rejecting his appeals and affirming that the case against him was strong enough to stand, even without a recovered body at the time of trial. By then, Theresa's remains had already been found, removing any remaining doubt. Yet while Samuel's story stalled behind prison walls, Theresa's legacy continued to grow. The community in Walker County remembers her not as the woman who vanished, but as someone who embodied warmth, kindness, and perseverance. Friends and family describe how her optimism was a gift, and her laughter a light that made others feel safe. Christina, her devoted sister, has carried that light forward. She speaks at vigils and domestic violence awareness events, determined to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Theresa's name has become a reminder that statistics are not just numbers, they are human lives. According to the World Health Organization WHO, 2021, nearly 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner. Theresa's story is just one thread in this vast and painful reality. Domestic violence. Advocates often point out the danger of silence, especially in cases involving law enforcement officers. Research shows that abuse in police families is 2 to 4 times higher than in the general population. Yet reporting rates are low because victims fear retaliation and lack of accountability. Theresa's case revealed how systems designed to protect can sometimes shield the abuser instead. In the years since her death, her family has worked to transform grief into action. They've raised awareness, partnered with local organizations, and spoken openly about the warning signs of abuse, control, threats, intimidation, and isolation. Christina has said, "If sharing Theresa's story saves even one woman, then her voice still lives on." Every statistic tells a story. Theresa's is one among thousands. But unlike many victims whose names fade into anonymity, Theresa Parker's memory endures as a call to action. She was not defined solely by the violence that ended her life, but by the resilience and hope she carried to her last day. Her sister put it best at a vigil. "Years later, my sister's laughter was stolen, but her story will not be silenced. As long as we speak her name, Theresa is still with us." Theresa Parker's story is not just the tale of one woman's disappearance. It is the chilling reminder of how love can turn dangerous and how silence can shield abusers for years. Theresa was a vibrant woman, a sister, a friend, a dispatcher, who once answered cries for help. Yet when she needed protection the most, the system failed her. Her husband, Samuel Parker, wore a badge meant to symbolize service and safety. Instead, he used it as a mask to hide cruelty, threats, and violence. For too long, his power went unchecked. But justice, though delayed, finally arrived through the courage of witnesses, the persistence of investigators, and the determination of a family who refused to give up. When Theresa's remains were discovered, her family finally found the closure they had been denied for years. Yet no verdict, no press conference, and no gravesite can erase the pain of a life cut short. Her story should move us to act. According to the CDC, nearly half of women murdered in the US are killed by intimate partners. These are not rare tragedies, they are a silent epidemic. If Theresa's story teaches us anything, it is this: we must listen, we must believe, and we must never stay silent in the face of abuse. Theresa Parker's laughter is gone, but her legacy is the call to protect others. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can keep these stories alive and spread awareness.